Hey everyone, welcome. I am so excited to have you joining today with AMA with LCJ. It is going to be an exciting time. So, I'm calling this episode, I guess maybe 000. I'm testing out new platforms, trying things out, hopping right in there. So, welcome to episode 000 with AMA with LCJ. So, I'm super excited to have you all joining me today. It's going to be a great time. So if you're following right now, if you're watching via Facebook, you have to make sure that if you want to comment and I'm able to see it, you can actually have it show up for you on the on the screen, and I can share it and push it out. So it'll be really nice. Now I want to make sure if all else fails here, I think there we go. I just wanted to make sure LinkedIn was good and we're all set with that. But if you put it in a comment, I'll be able to actually see it. And so therefore, I want to make sure that everybody's questions get answered. I'll be able to answer questions live. Also, I had some questions submitted, so I want to share with you what those questions are. So let's get into why I chose to do this AMA. Well, I'll keep it really simple. One of the reasons why I actually chose to do this Ask Me Anything live podcast was because throughout my time in corporate and consulting, I'm often asked quite a few questions just about leadership, about culture, about diversity, equity, including inclusion and belonging. I get asked a ton of questions. And so I wanted to be able to create a platform where people could ask me anything, either anonymously or publicly. My hope is eventually people would be able to actually join me live and be able to hop on. And ask a question. So, with that being said, I know that this will be the very first episode. It may be 15 minutes, it may be 30 minutes. We'll see how it goes. But I wanted just to go ahead and say, hey, make sure you drop in the chat and you say, hi, how are you? Hope everything is going well. But I'm going to hop right in and go ahead and get to the very first question. And this question is actually a question that I get asked quite a bit. And so what I want to do is start off by I'll go ahead and show this first question. So the very first question is, how can leaders inspire and motivate their team members to achieve their full potential? Now, I love this question because inspiration and motivation are internal, right? And so leaders are trying to create an external catalyst to create an internal inspiration and motivational thing. Now, one of the very first things that I like to share with leaders is this. Um, Not everybody is inspired and motivated by the same thing. The thing that got you where you are may not inspire and motivate some of the people or any of the people that you are leading. And so I have to be able to really put that in context for everyone because one of the biggest mistakes I see leaders making is trying to lead people how they responded, try to motivate people how they felt motivated and inspired. Does that work? Yes, sometimes it does, not all the time. And so that's kind of first thing out the gate. Hopefully, just a reminder to kind of let you all know that bit of piece of information. Now, how do you do this? Number one, you have to get to know your team. If you don't know your team, you're already starting behind the ball, right? So if you don't know what that person actually is aspiring to be or do in your organization in their life, we can't even start at inspiration and motivation, right? And so that's one of the very first things is, do you know why that person shows up every day? Do you know what gets them out of the bed every morning? For some people, their job, believe it or not, is to support whatever it is that they're doing after work. For some people, they love to climb the corporate ladder. For some people, including myself, one of my biggest motivating factors is building generational wealth. But you've got to know exactly what you're looking at and looking for in that person, right? So that's number one. Number 2, I always get weary of the word motivation. And let me tell you why. Motivation is fleeting. You know how I know? I work out every day. Every day that I work out, I am not motivated to work out, right? Like being motivated to work out is um yeah, I just don't be like, especially if I see the workout ahead of time and I know it's like burpees and all this cardio stuff, I'm not always motivated. Um and even when I show up, I think that my why is really, really deep. And so my coaches are able to inspire me to really get through it. And you're just not going to be able to always tap into motivation, right? And so when we think about how leaders can inspire and motivate their team members to achieve their full potential, we number one, you got to know what makes them tick, what gets them inspired, what gets them out of bed. You've got to figure out their why. That's ultimately what it boils down to. And one of the things that I'll even tag onto the back of this question, which is achieve their full potential. I'm going to circle back. Achieving full potential varies, right? Achieving full potential for me will look different than achieving full potential somewhere else for someone else, right? And so you've got to know what full potential looks like for that person. If you don't know what that looks like for that person, you're already behind the 8 ball, right? And so, like, even saying full potential has its own nuances. And so, how can leaders inspire and motivate their team members to achieve their full potential? Know them, know their why, and then know where they're going. And if they know where they're going, I think that allows you to really help unlock what it is that you're trying to see. Um, Ask them what they think their strengths are. Ask them what they think their opportunities are. How can you better help coach them? But that's all time in the barrel. And so I'll put it to you this way. In your one-on-ones, if all you're talking about are just straight numbers and only performance, when it comes time to really tap in and be able to inspire or motivate, like you're going to be missing that mark. Um, the other thing is, the other thing I found that's very interesting. I'm going to flip the coin. Not all leaders are inspirational. I'd hate to bust your bubble on that, but that's a real thing. Right? Not all leaders are inspirational. Some leaders um are gonna there's what's the word? Hold on, I'm looking for it. I'm searching for it. Charismatic, right? So there are some leaders who are extremely charismatic and can get up and can do the thing. Like I love this, like being able to sit and talk with you all face to face. Um And so with that being said, like I know that I translate really well, inspiring, but some leaders, that's not their thing. And so here's what I want to say to leaders who just struggle in that area. If you're not maybe the rah, 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 inspirational type of leader, you've got to find what's the balance, right? Because I do not believe in people showing up like way outside of themselves because people can suss it out anyways. For those who don't know, let me suss means like, hey, they can sniff it out, if you will. So if it's outside of what it is that's your norm or who you are, you've got to find this healthy balance between the two. Okay. So that's how I would say how you can how leaders can inspire and motivate their team members to achieve their full potential. Know your team, get to know them, figure out what makes them tick. What does their full potential actually look like? And some people have never even been asked that question, believe it or not. Some people have never been asked, what is your what does a fully actualized life look like for you in work? And then what does that look like for you outside of work? And really helping kind of understand how to tie those pieces of the puzzle together and then helping them map out. I could go on and on about really the other steps that it actually takes to do that, but I wanna make sure that I have time for more questions. Once again, if you're watching live, feel free to hop into the chat, say hey. If you have a question, make sure you ask me questions. I wanna be able to answer them live as well. All right, so next question we have, Oh, this is a good one. Another question that I got. What strategies can organizations implement to promote work-life balance for their employees? Oh, let me tell you. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Work Work-life balance. Let's talk work-life balance for a minute. I heard somebody recently say that work-life balance is somewhat of a myth, if you will. I don't necessarily know if I would say that it's a full-on myth. I do think that there's more of a work-life flow, right? So when I think about how you go about living life, but if I were to say how would one define work-life balance, let's just kind of say um work life balance is really I'd say work life balance is how I live my life and work, and then how I live my life outside of work, whether that's if you have a partner, if you have kids, if you have hobbies, if you have a side hustle, and then you have work, your traditional work, or like people like to say your day job. Um so here's what I'll say about this. When you think about work-life balance, number 1, I'll go it kinda ties into that first thread, which is work-life balance looks different for different people in different seasons in their life. Like, that's number 1, right? So before we even get into talking about some strategies that organizations can implement, we have to first understand that work life balance is a very individualized approach to how you integrate work and life collectively together. And like I said, I don't necessarily think there's any such thing as like balance, right? Like for those of you all who are in corporate, even those who are entrepreneurs and looking to build your teams, what we know for sure is this. um, with work life balance, there are times where life is heavier and work is heavier, right? So there's not necessarily this 50-50. And I don't always like the word work life balance. I think it's work life flow. I think it's work life integration is really what we're seeing. If you think about COVID and what happened with COVID, there was no such thing as like work life balance. It was just work life because it was all smashed together for so many people. Um, and so I think as an organization, how you go about actually balancing work life, like and really helping promote that for your team members, I think there's a couple things. Number one, how do you balance? How do you promote that? One, vacation. Be serious about vacation. Now, this is a pet peeve of mine. If you were on my team when I was leading teams, I am so serious. Now listen, it doesn't matter if you were on a team that I led when I was a volunteer or you were on my actual corporate teams. I am so serious about vacation. Very, very, very serious about it. When you're off, be off. How do you build that? Like, and a lot of times organizations don't realize they are what's the word I'm looking for? They are promoting lack of work life balance, right? So if you see somebody who always is answering emails on vacation and then they're popping in and they're doing stuff and working and then your leader is doing it and that person, you are creating a culture where work life balance doesn't exist. Right? So you have to think about what is the culture that you are actually creating in all of this. So vacation, be serious about vacation. When people are on vacation, encourage them to be on vacation. Turn their emails off. Make sure they have a backup. That's one of the things that I think is really, really important for organizations in promoting that. Um, Once again, if you guys are watching live, make sure you comment. You can drop a question in. I want to be able to share with you all in chat, so you can type in a comment. I'll see it. If you put in a question, I'll make sure I answer it on this. I'm just answering a couple of preceded questions that we have. So what's another strategy that organizations can do besides get serious about vacation? I think that when I think once again about this kind of work life, one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle, and I think this really flows into what I'll call future of work, which is flexibility. Now, I'm going to put an asterisk next to that because flexibility really applies to, I think, a lot more knowledge workers. And that's where flexibility comes in quite a bit. I think that's where you've seen such a boost in gig economy, where I think you're seeing Gen Zs and eventually Gen Alphas like opting for organizations and or roles that offer flexibility, right? I think even for me, I like working out at 8:30 in the morning. Let me tell you why. This is a great example of why flexibility is important. Um, I was working out at 5:30 in the morning. There are 2 things that are happening for me when I'm working out at 5:30 in the morning. Number 1, I just don't move the same at 5:30. I am 40. Um, Things just don't move how they normally move when you wake up at 5:30 in the morning. Number 2, I just woke up. So imagine trying to do CrossFit at 5:30 in the morning. We're counting, like, you've got reps, you're counting, no, it's just too much cerebral things going on at 5:30. I have absolutely enjoyed switching to the 8:30 class, and so for me, it was a game changer even in my fitness journey. I found I was more consistent at 8:30. Now, let's go back to flexibility. Why am I bringing this up? Because flexibility says that, hey, I can actually log on. I can make sure I can check my day, see what's going on with my day, make sure nothing's on fire, maybe even take a call or two, make sure the kiddos are outside, out the door in time for school or taking the kids to school. I can work out. That workout's an hour, hour 30. Then I'm able to hop on, shower, get dressed, and go in about the rest of my day. Right? That's that flexibility, right? And I think what we're seeing, especially a lot of times in organizations, what people are really pushing for and really kind of um, going about how they're trying to figure this out the most, is because I think that's what people are pushing for. Like over time, we had all this flexibility during COVID, and now we have, go back to office mandates, people trying to figure that out. Like, I've got childcare, I want to be able to do, like, I'm getting the work done. And so organizations who are able to flex, I think, is another opportunity to promote work-life balance, is being flexible. Um, so that's one of the ways that I would highly suggest promoting work-life balance is if there's flexibility, flexibility. For one of my things as a leader was, hey, you know the work, you know what you have to get done, you know when it's supposed to get it done. And so I think that that's also really important. I just want to say hey to Sierra. Thank you so much for joining me. Make sure you guys drop a comment, say hey. I can see all of your posts if you're watching via LinkedIn, on YouTube, or Facebook. I'm streaming to all 3 of those. So just say hey. I'll see you. So the other thing that I'll say about work-life balance, and it goes back to the very first point that I made, which is everybody has seasons of life. There are times for me in my career where I knew that, hey, I don't want balance right now. Right now, I want to focus on really pushing the needle on my career, and I'm going to be heads down. And so work is going to be heavier, right? That's that's what it is, right? Like I'm going in, right? And I'm okay giving up a little bit of free time and other things because I'm trying to push work forward. And then there are other times when, you have kiddos, young babies, and you want that to be a little bit more balanced. And so organizations have to come to terms that work-life balance is not the same for everyone. And we are really moving, I think, towards future of work, which is really work-life integration. How and what does that look like? Hey, Breed, how are you? Also, you all make sure if you have questions, you can drop the questions in. I will be able to share them and post them as well. Hi, Zen, how are you? Thank you for joining me. I want to be able to ask questions. It's nothing's off limits. Um, and this is the point of the AMA. Like I said, I had some preceded questions that were already sent, so I wanted to make sure I got those answered. But if you have any questions, so work-life balance really is important for organizations to help promote, but it really boils down to your culture. What is your culture? Is your culture a culture that is promoting this work-life balance, integration, work-life flow? If it's not, I think a lot of times organizations want to say that they have work-life balance, but the catch 22 to that is like It's not congruent with what's actually showing up. It's not congruent with what is being rewarded, right? All of that goes into that. So I have to really caution organizations who are looking for strategies that to really promote work-life balance is look at your culture. What is your culture? What are you rewarding? Because what you reward and what you actually how people show up is really what's going to grow, right? Like that's the biggest thing. Cortina, I appreciate that. Yeah, you're right. Work-life balance is not the same for everyone. Not the same at all. And I think it's something we've got to come to terms with, right? If you have any other questions, make sure you let me know. I'll be sure to answer them as I'm going through the questions. All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. So speaking of work-life balance, I picked this next question that I got because I felt like it was a really good flow into what we were talking about, right? So the other question I was asked was how can leaders encourage a culture of innovation and creativity within their organizations? Now, this question, I seeded this question specifically ahead of the question that I talked about before when we talked about inspiration, motivation, and work-life balance. Why did I choose this question to go after? Because when you look at inspiration, when you look at motivation, you look at this work-life balance, um, you cannot create a culture of innovation and creativity if your teams are burned out. I said it. I put it out there. That's it. You cannot create a culture of innovation and creativity within your organization if your teams are burned out, right? So, looking and figuring out for your leaders, right? Like, what does that look like? Yeah, I can say, hey, innovate and create. All of that boils down to, hey, is your team okay? When was the last time, if you're a leader or if you are a team member, right? When was the last time somebody said, "Hey, how are you doing?" Right? That's really what a lot of this is gonna come into with innovation and creativity. The other thing we talk about, nobody wants to talk about with innovation and creativity, specifically in organizations. I'm about to drop the F bomb. Failure. Tricked you. Um, I I think that when you think about, um, failure, do you reward the risk takers? Because innovation and creativity requires failure. I'm just putting it out there. I'm just putting it out there. Because see, some people are like, yo, we want to innovate ish, right? Like, it's very funny because it's like, oh, we're a culture of where innovation and creativity, and we want to see people. But if you have, in order to have innovation and creativity, there is a level of disruption. And so, for organizations or leaders who are trying to encourage a culture of innovation and creativity, you have to have a high tolerance for disruption. Innovation doesn't exist without disruption, it doesn't exist, right? And so, when you think about how can leaders encourage a culture of innovation and creativity, what is your risk tolerance? What is your tolerance for disruption? Because if you want to keep things neatly and tight in a box, then it's okay to be like, "Hey, you know what? We're just a really good fast follower. We're gonna follow really well, right? Or we're not gonna be first to market." But I think innovation is a word that is tossed around, um, way too often without necessarily understanding what that means. Innovation means you're taking risks. Innovation means you're disrupting the status quo. And what is your organization's tolerance for disruptors? Are disruptors celebrated or are disruptors celebrated only when they succeed? right? Those are things you have to think about. Even as a leader, if you want your teams, I'll even go one level in. We're not even going to go organizational. We're going to go if you are a leader in the team. And Sierra, I see your question. I'll make sure I get to it. Once again, if you want to ask a question, put it in. I'll be able to see it. I'll share it and answer it on this Ask Me Anything. So here's what I'll say on a granular level. On a granular level for leaders, if you're leading a team day to day and you want your team thinking outside of the box, right? You want them pushing as far ahead as they possibly can, getting creative about solutions. You've got to foster that culture for them to try. And even if they fail, it's okay to fail. It's like, hey, you know what? This was a really good first attempt. Can we make a tweak here? Can we make a tweak there? But great job pushing out, right? That to me is what fosters that. That's how you do that. You have to celebrate the shortcomings of the innovation and creativities as well as the success. So, okay, so Sierra has a question for me. I'm going to toss this up here. All right, in your opinion, when should one push through challenges versus knowing when it's time to begin a new chapter? Great question. When should you push through challenges versus knowing when it's time to begin a new chapter? So here's what I'll say. I think that's a great question, Sierra. Here, this one's tricky. Um, when I think about like my career, anytime I say yes to a role or yes to a new season, for me, there's a couple of things I have to think about. Um, what am I trying to achieve while I'm there? Right. And so sometimes it's a little bit easier to push through the challenges when you know that you have an objective that you're trying to achieve, right? So I've been in some challenging roles. Like my very first role, um, at Dell was like, "Thank you for choosing Dell. This is Latoya. How can I help you?" I was in consumer sales and I had my MBA, right? Um, But I wouldn't trade that time for anything in the world because it shaped who I was and really helped me understand things that I think gave me an advantage down the line. Um, but pushing through challenges really depends on what you want to get out of it. Now, the other part of knowing when it's time to begin a new chapter. So there are times where I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to push through. Um, and There are times when you're trying to push through the challenge and you're hitting a brick wall, and you have to know what your tolerance level is for how to get through those challenges, right? If you say, okay, this is no longer a fit, this is no longer serving me, I'm actually not doing what I need to do or moving where I need to go, then it's okay to say, hey, it may be time to start something new. And I've been in both seats. Right? I've been in both seats. I've been in a seat where I push through the challenge and I'm like, okay, hey, right now I'm going to give this 6 months, 9 months. This is where I want to be. There's some things I need to get done and establish for myself so that I can move on to the next chapter. I'm going to get through these challenges and push through and find a way. I'm going to figure out what that deeper why is or what the objective is that I'm trying to achieve. And then I'll go. Right. Um, the beginning of a new chapter, I'll kind of for me, I am very unapologetic. I'm a person of faith. And so for me, I feel like one of the things that I do is I get quiet, I get still, I pray a lot. um, and it's listening for me, like where is this going? What do I need to do? How do I need to figure out those things, right? So it's been both of them for me, Sierra. I've kind of had to learn how to push through at times, and figure out that bigger why because I know that there's something else I'm trying to achieve while I'm there. And then there are other times where, at that point the challenges are not the challenges are no longer serving me and I'm like almost stagnant. And I think that that's a real thing, but you have to know where you're going. Some people cut ties way too soon. Some people cut ties way too soon, right? and you try to move on to the next chapter before you're ready. And I've seen that be a big thing. So think about what it is that you want. What's your next maybe 2 to 3 moves, and make sure that you're not gapped in that. Ah, what's up, Cortina? Yeah, hashtag Team Summit. What's up? Um, so that's one of the things that I would say is really important, at least for me, is getting still, knowing what I want, praying for me. Um, have I achieved what I needed to achieve? Are these challenges um really, really worth it? And am I trying to get it right? So I think those are big pieces of the puzzle. Thanks. Matt says, love that advice of walls and obstacles that guide us to a next chapter versus walls that we need to overcome and break down. 100%. Like sometimes y'all, let me tell you something. Matt, I'm glad you said that. That's a great point. Sometimes now I'm gonna tell on myself for 2.5 seconds with this. Um, Sometimes when we're hitting the challenges or the wall, sometimes it's through and sometimes it's over. But you have to know where you are in the journey because to bust through a wall, you got to make sure there's a level of stamina between going through a wall and going over a wall. And you got to know which one you are, right? Like sometimes there are days you can just, boop, I can leapfrog over that challenge and keep it rolling. There are other times where you got to push through the wall to get where you need to go because you know what you need to do. And those are all really important. Matt, I love that. Great point. Let me know if y'all have some more questions for me. I'm loving the questions. Keep them coming. Um, if not, I'm gonna probably toss up another question. Um, and we'll go from there. And this next question is also kind of I've definitely seeded my questions, some of the questions that I've gotten before this, and I'll make sure that I drop in the comments so you can even ask questions anonymously as well. If you want to ask them anonymously, I have a form you can fill out and drop it in, and I'll make sure that I get to it. So next question. Next question we have is great, which is how can leaders proactively address burnout and stress in the workplace? Great question. Um, so there's a couple of things. Um, Man, this is like perfectly building on each other, right? Inspire and motivate, promoting work-life balance, encouraging innovation and creativity. Um, how can leaders proactively address burnout and stress in the workplace? So I have some thoughts on this. The one thing um The one thing that I'll say, and Matt, thank you for your question. I will answer it as soon as I get done with this one. So one of the things I'll talk about with burnout and stress in the workplace, I think stress is stress. I don't think you can completely mitigate stress in terms of um, what as you're working in a workplace. I think stress is there's healthy stress. But I want to talk about burnout because I think one of the things that a lot of leaders make the mistake about, I'll say leaders in organizations, when they address burnout, a lot of times people think about how much work you have, right? Oh, there's so much work, and then too much work leads to burnout. I'm a high capacity individual, so very rarely does the amount of work burn me out. But I will tell you what burns me out. And I think this actually burns out more organizations faster than they even know, which is how you work. How you work and how you get things done culture wise as an organization is a way faster indicator of how somebody is going to burn out and handle stress in your workplace. Find a poor culture, and I will show you a place that people are burned out. How you work matters. Enough organizations are not addressing how you work. Your how behaviors have to be on point, right? So if you have a culture where um things are not as organized, not streamlined, not consistent. People are working all these different ways. Like you're trying to have to figure it out, right? Like those are all things that create burnout. One of my, I'll tell you, one of my pet peeves, I had a conversation um, with an organization, um, remain nameless, but I figured out one of my trigger words. It said, "Oh, the organizations, they're very matrixed." Matrixed. Matrix organizations that are too complex and too matrixed and things are not clear are absolutely organizations that will show a high volume of burnout and stress. There's nothing more frustrating than not knowing who to go to for when and where, and who has approval and who doesn't have approval. And then how am I trying to figure this out? And then the bureaucracy of all of it on top of that, that all leads to burnout. And so when I think about leaders, when you're thinking about how you can make sure that your team is not burning out and too stressed, bad stress, right? I think there's amount of healthy stress, right? Burned out and bad stress. The first question I'm going to ask you is how do you work? How do you work? Not the amount of work, but how do you work? Are you inefficient? And I think I'm going to add a caveat to this. I try not to generalize, but when I think about Gen Z, and then I'll even say I'll toss in millennials in there too, right? Digitally native, right? Understands things at a rate that like, hey, if I don't know it, I can figure it out, right? I think that is also one of the things. If your technology is not on point, that's gonna be burnout for the next generation. I'm a millennial, and I'm an old millennial, and I'll tell you, I am a UI snob times 50. Let Put something ugly in front of my face and ask me to use it. I do not wanna use that thing. It just drives me nuts, right? When things aren't efficient and I can't figure it out, you have to start to think about how you work. Are you engineering your workflow the same way you're engineering your products and your services? That's a fair question. Are you that intentional, right? Okay, that's a good question. Okay, Matt has a question. Let me Hey, my mom is on. What's up? Okay, so Matt said best advice for navigating into mid-career. It almost feels tougher than starting brand new in a new space or role. Ooh, here's what I'll say. I've made several pivots in my career. So before I answer this question, I'm gonna run my resume down, not for just for the sake of it, but I'm gonna tell you just because I think it's important that you kind of understand. So when I got out of undergrad, I was consulting work for a small economic development company. From there, went back to school for my MBA. During that time, I consulted for small businesses. I worked for the census and I taught at University of Phoenix. All of that within the first 5 years of me graduating. So out of undergrad, first 5 years, post 5 years, I never worked for an organization. Prior to that, I had some internships. But for the most part, that's it. Right. We moved to Texas. I come in, I'm working corporate. I started in corporate in sales. I moved from sales to kind of lead development, from lead development into business development, where I just helped organizations talk about technology and technology being a hire, from organizations all the way from small business all the way up to startup space. Right. That's what I did. Okay. Then I took a break from corporate. So I took 4 years off after that. Stay with me, Matt. I'm going somewhere. Um, I took I took 4 years left, had my own company. That company was called Pretty Geeky, and that company was largely based around like digital marketing automation. And even during that time, I was volunteering also with my church, who was growing at the time, and so I did a lot of media, learned a lot around like videography, photography, really honing in on my storytelling. And I realized I didn't want to do digital and marketing automation for other people anymore. So what did I do? I pivoted. I went back to corporate. But because my business I spent a lot of time in the digital space and marketing space, I came back to corporate on the enterprise side, I guess consumers, not from consumer, more or less into the enterprise. and I worked on on the e-business side of the business, right? And it was more semi-marketing role, but working with customers, working with sales reps and all of these things. And then from there, I did that for a year and a half, and then I switched to diversity and inclusion. Um, and then I was in the D&I space, had several roles from ERGs to chief of staff, then overseeing like the learning side of things, the consulting side of D&I, all of these things, right? So I've ran the gamut in terms of that, right? Of what my career was. And so the best advice I can have for navigating into mid career is just do what you want to do. I know that sounds crazy, but here's the thing. I think sometimes experience is important, but sometimes experience can be overvalued and overrated. For me, I'm sometimes I for me, I was more apt to take chances on people who had less experience in the space that I was in and had the dog in them, right? They were really looking to push and figure things out and learn and grow. What are your intangibles, right? Is it figure out what your intangibles are and then figure out how you can align that if you want to move over. And there's nothing wrong with starting over in a new space or in a new role. As you can see, I started, from consulting small businesses, economic development, all of that into computer sales, into lead development, into business development, into digital marketing, storytelling, videography, like photography, that whole creative space, right? All of those things into D&I. And then now I have my own company, Culture by Design, and that's really what I'm moving towards is future of work and culture. D&I is a component of that, but it really is taking a lot of my experience across the board with performance, with with sales, with culture, with D&I, with leadership, and how do you actually tie all of those things together? So I think the biggest piece of that puzzle is figure it out and then like just keep making steps. If it doesn't work, it won't break. Like I think a lot of times people get worried about hopping into a space. Like I've taken a role and it not worked out. I was like, this is not what I wanted it to be, and figured out how to move to the next thing. Right? So, it's okay if you figure it out, you hop in and you realize this is not it. Um, leave better than you go leave the place better than when you left, better than when you got there, right? But it's okay to pivot and move to the next thing, and there's nothing wrong with starting over. Like, I think a lot of times people freak out about it. It's okay to start over. I've started over so many times. Zen, you asked a great question. So, how do I keep retooling? Do I think certifications are valuable for retooling? Ooh, Zen, this is a spicy question. Um, how did I keep retooling? Um, I think certifications are important if you are going into a net new field. Like, say, for instance, you were going from, I don't know, you decided to go from marketing to coding. A certification probably does require that. I think sometimes people rely too much on certifications, and I'm going to use D&I as a great example, right? So I went through Cornell. I went through that program, but I went through that program probably for D&I. I went through that certificate program, probably after I had been in D&I for about a year and a half, 2 years. And I think some people are really passionate about a space, and so they'll say, "Oh, I'll go get a certification and then figure it out." And then try to get over. But, like, for D&I, like, there's a difference between people who are passionate and people who are practitioners. And I think the reason, I got the most out of everything that I was doing with that certificate when I decided to go was because I'd spent time in the space, and so now I'm able to apply. It's almost like people who go to school to study whatever it is, most of the time the things you study is theory, right? Like, I don't know about y'all, but, like, most of the things you learn in school are best case best case scenarios, right? This is how this looks if I can actually if everything is going right. Um, and so when you think about certificates, depending on where you are and what you're trying to get a certification in, I think that can determine whether it makes sense to go ahead and like reskill or retool, right? For me, I typically just go where my interests follow. So you ask me how did I keep retooling? I think a lot of times I just go where my interest follows. And the funny thing is, it's led me down to a very interesting set of skills that, like, packaged together, I think not a lot of people can touch, right? Like, I understand the importance of technology for culture, for performance, right? For DEI and data, right? So, like, I've pretty much in all of my retooling or reskilling, I have a very unique set of lens in how I actually see things, which becomes a competitive advantage for me. Um, I think when you think about if you're trying to decide whether to do a certificate or not, depending on the organization and where you are, I also think it's important to think about what's valued. In some spaces, the certificate is absolutely valued and necessary, go get it. If it's not, then I would say no. And I'm going to speak for 2.5 seconds specifically to Black women. Hold on. I've got to take a sip of my energy drink. Not sponsored, but I want to specifically talk to Black women, and I'll put an asterisk as well as Black men, but specifically Black women. Black women are the one of the largest groups of educating themselves, going to school, educated, and achieving all of these degrees. There's nothing wrong with that. But here's what I have learned. You've got to think about your network is your net worth and what it actually takes to go do it. Sometimes we think that eventually you can certify or degree yourself into the next thing, and you're not. You're not going to be able to do it. And so you can find ourselves where particularly Black women are making what? I forgot the latest, but it's 60 cents a dollar to a white male. And then you add student debt on top of that. Is it worth it? Right? And so those are things that I think about, right? Like those are pieces of the puzzle. If the certificate makes sense to put in where you needed to get it to go, then yeah, absolutely go do it. Um, but I think sometimes we want to certify and degree our way up, and it's just not how it works. Sponsorship, if you're in corporate America, sponsorship is where it's at. Like you've got to make sure that people know you, right? People know who you are, that you have people who are advocating for you, that you have mentors. All of those things are going to move you way faster than a degree or a certificate. So I think Zen, that's a great question. It's just loaded because it depends on industry, depends on organizational culture, and then what you're trying to do. But I would say before you go out and do it, know what's valued because sometimes you just don't need to do it, and you can save your coins. You can save your little coins. You know what I'm saying? Oh, Sierra, I see you. Yo, I'm glad that hit. I'm glad that hit for you. Like it's important, right? Like we got to have these conversations, right? Like degrees and certifications, like do it when it makes the most sense or you're going to get the most value for it, not hoping that it's going to get you to the next step. Cuz otherwise you're going to find yourself in a world of hurt. These are good. These are good. I love it. If you have any more questions, if you're watching, if you're just joining the live stream, first of all, thank you for joining. I have started this AMA with LCJ live podcast. My goal is to go live on Tuesdays. I'll play around with the times. Right now, we're gonna probably stick to 2 p.m. on Tuesdays, because Tuesdays at 2. Literation helps remember. Um, but if you have questions, you can um, feel free to drop them in. I'm able to see them all in the chat. I'd love to be able to answer. If not, I've got questions that have come through, and I want to be able to answer those as well on the backside. So if you see me putting up questions, those are just other questions that were seeded before the live podcast, um, and then going from there. So um, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in and then go from there. Oh, Zen, I love that. Yes. Also ask your companies to pay. boop, that right there. A lot of times people don't know, like, before you even spend your money, you should check your benefits. That was, like, one of the biggest things that I do, is I go all through your benefit sites, like, top to bottom, across, up, down, sideways, through and through. Know what your company offers, because there may be some continuing education opportunities, and that is one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle, I think, is sometimes we don't even know what we have access to. So, absolutely, Zen. Love that. Love that. All right, we got any more questions? I got just about 9 more minutes on this live. Um, if not, I'm gonna answer another question here. Um, if we don't have any other questions coming through on the comments. Make sure you let me know, how are you liking this? Is this a good format? Are you enjoying it? I want to hear from you. Because this is by far it's fun for me. I could do this probably every day. I won't do it every day, but I could do it every day. Um, all right. My hope is eventually, for those of you all who are just joining, my hope with AMA is eventually to be able to invite people in, and then you would be able to ask the questions live. So that is my hope. And so it'll be almost like a live podcast, if you will, where people can come in and ask questions, um, and it go from there. Um, Thanks for the answer. Great advice. Awesome. Thank you, Sierra. I appreciate that. Um, no, yeah, this is good stuff. This is fun. Thank you, Matt. All right, so I don't see any other questions so far coming through LinkedIn, so I'm going to answer another question. This will probably take us to the end. Um, so, what are some practical ways to ensure equal opportunities for career development among employees? Ooh, these are good. What are some practical ways to ensure equal opportunities for career development among employees? Here's what I'll say. If you haven't noticed, there is a running theme, if you will, a running theme with today's AMA, which is know your team. And if you're an individual contributor and watching my stream, this is a good example of also still continue to watch and join. This is not for just for leaders, but it's to help turn those wheels so that you even know how to advocate for yourself. So, what are some practical ways to ensure equal opportunities for career development among your employees or your team members? This one is along the same lines of what I'll say earlier. Know your team. Ensuring equal opportunities for career development. There's a difference between equal and equitable. So let's actually start there. Equal means everybody gets the same thing, right? That's what equality is. Everybody gets the same thing, doesn't matter where you start. Equitable means that each person gets what they need. So even if I were to rewrite this question, I would say, what are some practical ways to ensure equitable opportunities for career development among employees? Right? Not just equal, but equitable. Right? So that's probably the first thing. It's slightly nuanced, but I think it's important, right? Because not every person on your team is going to need the same level of development. So, one of the things that you can do, very practical ways, if we go back to the very beginning of the live stream, for those of you all who didn't watch, that was one of the questions really was around inspiration and motivation and was finding out what that person wants and what does that look like to reach their full potential. This is kind of a full circle moment in terms of equal opportunities for career development. What you have to do is figure out exactly what it is or where they're going or what their next steps are, right? And so, um, I think one of the pieces of the puzzle for that is, um, what sorry, I just lost my train of thought. My watch just buzzed. Where is it that they're trying to go? Where are they gapped? And then what opportunities do they need? So say for instance, we'll have 2 people. I'll give you a really practical example. 2 people. One person maybe has been in the company for a year and a half, 2 years, but they've also interned with the company. They have a great network. Um, Solid, right? Then maybe you have somebody who didn't intern, both are early in career, they're both at a year and a half mark, but this person doesn't have as much visibility and understanding of kind of the whole landscape of it. To give them equal opportunities is not necessarily the best path forward. I would say, what's the equitable thing to do? Well, the person who's been here plus the internships has a stronger understanding of the organizational culture. They may be ready for a different career development opportunity than the person who maybe needs to spend a little bit more time. Maybe they need to work on executive presence. Maybe they need to work on like time management, right? So everybody has their own path. And so when I think about practicality, it is helping your team members, or if you are the team member, figure out where it is you want to go, understand where you're gapped, and then create a plan to go from there. One of the biggest things that I even learned for myself is advocacy. How do I advocate for myself and how do I advocate for my team members? If I know my team member needs more exposure and visibility to senior leadership so that they can get to know them, which is a thing, right? How do I do that? What does that look like? Right? How do I make sure that their name's coming up in the room? I may say, okay, great. You know what? This career development, I'm going to give you this project because I think you're now to a point where you need a little bit more visibility. This is going to stretch you. But it's very specialized. And this is what I'll say because I know we're getting close to time, especially as leaders, you have to understand that your role is not just to do the work. You are the conductor of the stories, like in terms of everything that you're looking at. You're the conductor. You've gotta know who's who's where, what path they're on, what they need to do, where they need to grow, what is their capacity right now. Some people don't have the capacity all the way through, depending on what they have going on, not just in work, but out of work. All of those pieces of the puzzle go into play before you decide who gets opportunities and when. And then you have bias. We don't have time to discuss bias this week. But making sure, one of the practical ways to do that is just make sure that you're not allowing bias to creep into the system. Like, "Oh, you know what? I get along really great with Zen, so Imma give Zen the next thing, but, Imma pick on Matt because I actually know Matt, right? But, Matt, he's good, but Zen, I really like Zen. So Zen will get the opportunity." But maybe Matt has it, right? And so I will tell you this, there's a couple of things, there's a framework, um, that, I will maybe figure out a way to share it, but I really started to figure out for myself how I was able to talk about how I was able to advocate for myself in terms of what I contribute, what was I responsible for? What did I help drive? Where did I consult? It was kind of all of those pieces of the puzzle together, and that helped me advocate for myself. But as a leader, it's important that you know exactly where people are, and you are not just leaning towards the person who may be a little bit easier because they're easier, right? But it could be that Matt actually is the person who's ready, but you don't know Matt as well, so you're gonna go with Zen. And that's where leaders, I think that's one of the pieces. You gotta know what the package is and remove bias out of the system. Okay, listen, I've been on here an hour. I can't believe it. Time flies when you're having fun. I hope that you all have enjoyed this. Um, this will keep up. But thank you, Bree, so much. I appreciate that. Yes, I'm hopping off too. But I'll be back next week. So we'll do AMA with LCJ. It'll be on Tuesdays at 2. And we'll just continue to talk. We'll chat, ask questions. I'll have some more questions for people to ask as well. Um, But thanks for joining me. Feel free to share this. This will be up on Facebook. It's up on my Facebook page. It's also up on LinkedIn as well as YouTube. I'm building out the YouTube page, so you'll be able to find that shortly. But I hope that you all enjoy yourselves. Thanks and enjoy and have a great rest of your week. I'll see you.